I'm Ashley Stanley. I'm the founder and executive director of Lovin Spoonfuls. We are a food rescue based right here in Boston. So we take food that's otherwise being thrown away from retail, wholesale, farmers markets, and we upcycle that directly into the social service stream. Right now, we're recovering about 75 to 80,000 pounds of food each week, and that's feeding over 30,000 people in the community. We work with over 225 partners on both ends of the operations to make sure that we can get fresh, healthy food that would otherwise go to waste into the mouths and bellies of people who don't have regular access to good, healthy food.
Ashley, it's so nice seeing you again. I haven't seen you in so many years, and I love that you guys are still doing the greatest work known to man. I mean, combating waste. So I want to start at the beginning of where did you come from and how did this, I mean, like the evolution of who Ashley is and the evolution of the company?
Well, the first part of the question is pretty boring in comparison to the evolution of Lovin Spoonfuls, which truly, I mean, you and I met in 2012, I think, through Mass Challenge. And the evolution of Spoonfuls has really been a response to why is there so much waste without a way to capture it and divert it to folks who need it, because that's sort of the gap, right? And we talk about the gap being between abundance, that food that's available, and the need, people who need it. And for me, this has really been sort of a masterclass, an experience, just complete evolution, I guess, of really trying to understand what that solution could look like, and then taking the last 10 years to create best practices around that and continue to carry out the fundamental mission.
So what's your background? I mean, how are you the one that's qualified to have this company? Yes, you have a big heart. Yes, you want to combat the whole entire food waste, but what's your background?
Not this. I didn't have a background in nonprofit. I didn't have a background in food, wholesale, hospitality, or retail. My background sort of spans, I did work in retail for a long time at the corporate level. And for my younger life, I was an athlete, and I really was expecting that I would play either in the Olympics or professionally. But an injury my sophomore year of college sort of took me out of the game, so to speak. So in terms of traditional training to start a nonprofit, I don't have any. But I do think that that's been maybe one of the keys to being able to identify and find a platform to be able to create a business that is sustainable, that's pragmatic, that's realistic, and that doesn't perhaps fall into, I think, some of the pitfalls that a lot of entrepreneurs can fall into, or even some of the cycles of providing a solution that needs a problem to stay in business for a lot of nonprofits. So again, it's been an experience, but I think I've done just as much learning along the way as everybody else. 10 years ago when we started, food was just getting into the regular conversations that we have as a community, as individuals, with our families, with our friends, and understanding what sort of the buzzwords actually mean and where the value in those buzzwords is: sustainable, organic, local, slow. What do those things all mean? And I think this came to be at the right time when people started to become interested in what and how they're eating.
How did this pandemic affect you? And I say that I'm asking in regards of the waste that you are working with, like that you're garnering, are from restaurants. Restaurants are closed. So
I'm just going to stop you right there.
Yeah,
That's
good.
the biggest
Tell me.
That's the biggest misconception. And part of it is because we are so heavily supported by the restaurant community. We don't rescue from restaurants. Restaurants are sort of the best model for us in terms of no to, zero waste. They run on such small margins that it's incumbent on them to figure out how to use everything and utilize everything just to make ends meet and just to make their business work. So the examples of the kind of vendors that we work with, grocery store brands, supermarkets, farms, farmers markets, produce wholesalers, again, the amount of food that we move and the weight really begins at, 100, 200 pounds plus. And that becomes something that is created post-retail in the market. So it's food that's losing its cosmetic or marketable, saleable value, and still retains all of its nutritional value, but can't be sold from the floor as is.
I think that was one of the things where when I used to volunteer, when I was younger, we used to volunteer a lot at the food banks. And when I would see a can, I'm like, well, what's wrong with this? They're like, there's a dent in it. I'm like, so is the dent causing this to go bad? They're like, no. I'm like, but so I don't understand. They're like, it's not pretty. It's not pretty. And that was for me where, like, well, this is the silliest thing in the world. I'm from Haiti, where we use all, I mean, when people are talking about, like, I'm a vegetarian, vegan, or when I'm like a certain things, like, we use everything. Like we use everything. And so it was like a moment of truth for me when we were being more aware in America. Like, what do you mean you throw away things because they're not pretty? Like, that's insane to me. So this is where when you're at the restaurant, and I put myself through college working in a restaurant, and the amount of food that was thrown away drove me absolutely crazy. Like, well, we can take that home. They're like, no, we can't take it home because we're not allowed by state or et cetera. So how did you guys get around? I mean, every single state has a different rule of thumb about the food waste. How did you get around that to make sure that you're able to capture it, but also what happens to the food? Where does it go? What's the process?
Yeah, so a lot to unpack in there, and I can relate. I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and so value is incredibly important. And I think when we talk about the true value of food, it's so hard to remember life, although I try a lot, pre-social media and pre-Instagram and pre-hashtags and pre all of this. Food had a value that was much more than what it looked like. And I'm a culprit. I post pictures of food sometimes. A lot of my friends post pictures of food, and it's fun and it's cool, but that is not the actual value of food, right? What connects us all as human beings is the biological necessity to eat. It is what sustains us at the very, very basic level. And so when we really pull it back and we look at what the value of food is, it truly doesn't matter what sort of the cosmetic value is. I think it helps. I think it serves the purpose. I am a consumer of food magazines and food media and social media now and all that stuff. But before all of that, what mattered was are people getting what they need? And as an athlete, I experienced that physically. Does it taste the way we want to as the grandchild of really wonderful cooks and great family recipes? Those are the things that matter. And so right now we're living in a time where people are starting to celebrate sort of the ugly food movement. My fear about that is that it's just going to be sort of another hashtag and that we're not fully embracing what that means. But I'm happy that it's happening. And it can be really fun at farmers markets and even a little dirty sometimes, but it can be fun. So I think when we talk about the value of food, we have to do what we have to do to make sure that we retain the value of food. And for me, when you retain the value of food, you retain the value in its consumer, and that's retaining value in people in the community, and understanding that everybody needs to eat. And so how do we do that? When we talk about capturing that food, yes, some states may have some different regulations, but when Bill Clinton was in office, he had passed the Emerson Act, and this was a federal protection designed specifically to protect donation of perishable food. And so that supersedes anything that we might have to get around. But the truth is, a lot of these sort of perceived legal liabilities a lot of times they're corporate liabilities. A lot of times it's about the fear of being liable, and somebody might get sick in my restaurant. And those are the things that are just a part of life. And those are things that hopefully, if everybody's doing it right, they don't come into play. So I think for us, when we started, it was very important to me, again, as a newcomer, these long-standing maybe barriers to entry, they didn't matter to me because I didn't know what they were. For me, it was very just pragmatic and realistic, and sort of like, okay, so if these are the fears, why don't we try to allay those fears and sort of mitigate what the peripheral barriers would be, and build this thing in a way that pulls that into the conversation. And that means creating standards which have now become best practices and have been adopted by other organizations here in Massachusetts and around the country. So I think those are the things that are really, really important about understanding what we can do with food, what the power of food in a community is, and how to be able to treat it as part of a supply chain, regardless of who the end user is. And I think that's one of the things that we've done that's been unique, that's allowed this to really become at the forefront of the conversation.
You started your career in sports, you went into retail, into nonprofit. What did you learn in the two, one, your passion, what did you learn as being an athlete, going into corporate world, into this point? Like what is the learning curve? I shouldn't say the learning curve, but what were the learning moments that you took with you? That's what I meant to say, that you took with you from each point.
Sure. I mean, sports, what do you learn? Sure, you learn how to play sports. I was playing at a particularly high level from a young age. What I knew and what was very clear in all of my best coaches and best teammates, you find where you are talented, or you find your position, what you're good at. Unless you're playing golf or singles tennis, you're not moving the ball up the field without your teammates. And while there's shared talent and shared skill and everybody's got to do that, nothing happens without your team. And not even that, you've got to find people who are better than you at the things that you're not great at.
Yeah.
So hands down, building a business, and so much of this, I never set out to start a business. I never set out to be an entrepreneur. I've been saying this for 10 years. I didn't know that I was one until somebody referred to me as one, or called me an entrepreneur. And what I've started to recognize in sort of the entrepreneur community is people are very interested in like the value of being an entrepreneur. And the truth is your business is only reflected by the strength of your team and the guts of your business. And that means everybody from, entry level to my SLT, including our board, including our advisory board, including our culinary board. So everybody that comes into the Spoonfuls network, sphere, family, whatever, we all are making up different pieces in different ways. And that's what makes us the strongest. So that's the first thing. And I completely forget the second part of your question.
So going into retail. So now you're the athlete, but then you go into retail.
Oh, sure. So my grandfather was the vice president of Bloomingdale's. So I grew up, in a very weird juxtaposed situation, like wearing sweatpants every day, like hanging out on a catwalk and, in New York. And it was just so crazy. But when I could no longer play sports, and I really sort of was like, okay, so where am I going to figure out how to work and how to be an employee and how to have a career and how to support myself and all of those things, I had asked him at the time for a little help breaking in, and I was hoping for a little nepotism, and he got me a job sweeping the floor of the 72nd Street Ralph Lauren store. And I knew and know Ralph Lauren. It was a very funny moment one day where he came by the store, and I passed him with my broom, and he said, what is happening? What are you doing? And I said, I'm starting. And the thing is that my grandfather started out as a stock boy at Bloomingdale's. And so the idea of understanding every piece of the business in order to provide an exceptional level of customer service, because you know about the product, you know about everything, you know how everything works, you can identify ways to make the experience for your customer better and for your employees. So I would say, you know, starting Spoonfuls and by myself at the time, I have been a food rescue coordinator. I didn't do it nearly as well as our frontline now, but I was in a truck. And I think as we move forward, you know, and every new employee that comes to Spoonfuls, whatever vertical they're in, whatever role they have, they spend at least a week on a truck. Our new hires right now, unfortunately, in COVID times, are not getting the benefit of being able to go and do ride-alongs with our frontline right now. But it is an essential part of onboarding, just so that people truly understand every level of what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. And that creates the opportunity for an exceptional level of customer service, which is ultimately what we want to provide, whether it's to our vendors, the food partners who we're working with, but even more importantly, to our end user. And I think this is what gets lost in nonprofit a lot. We somehow devalue the end user because it is not somebody who is a higher end customer spending $200 on a pair of jeans. And the way that I see it, the service that is being provided by the nonprofit community is more valuable, especially in these times. So you have to honor your end user the same way as if they are a higher end customer. And again, it sort of completes the circle of creating value at every piece of the business.
That was a darn good answer. Jeez Louise, I love that. That was great.
I hope we're recording that so I can remember it at some other point.
I always tell people I ask a very, very loaded question because it's not about me, it's about you, and it gives you time to really talk. And so I may do it again, but just let it be known this is why I do it. I want to dump a lot to you, and then just you let it roll. The pandemic, we're January. Wow, brand new decade. Yes, so many things going, and then all of a sudden, this like 100-year-old, holy crap, we have a pandemic hits us. And then 10 years ago, when we met, is when you started your company, when there was a last economic downfall. What did you learn 10 years ago? And what has the pandemic done for you and your team? There you go. I'm gonna let you answer it just as is.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to go back and doing it again, starting a non-revenue generating company in the middle of a recession or at the end of a recession, not my best move. But in terms of responding to a need, that hasn't changed, right? And that's sort of the good news and the bad news. The fundamental purpose has stayed the same. And when you come out of a recession, the economy might recover and it might stabilize. But the folks who have suffered as a result and who are or were teetering on that line that separates security and insecurity of any kind, it becomes so razor thin that most fall below it. When the economy stabilizes, it doesn't mean that folks who fell below the poverty line rise back over. It takes an impossibly long time to be able to do that. And the things that stack against people who are in that position can feel and can seem insurmountable. And then the system becomes choked and the need it just grows. And so I think they're forgotten in every recovery, and every time the economy recovers and stabilizes, I don't think we think about the folks that don't recover at that same pace. So 10 years later, this pandemic, and especially in this moment. You know, we've talked for so long about the demographics that we have served over the last decade being disproportionately affected by any kind of urgent situation. And I think now there's some proper attention being paid for that. And I think there's a wider base of understanding for that for communities of color, the lack of access to healthcare, the lack of access to economic justice, and certainly the lack of access to testing, to treatment, all of those things are sort of exploding in a way that I have to believe will be part of something foundational going forward. In terms of how COVID has affected the work of Lovin Spoonfuls, I mean, we've seen just in about 3 months, you know, our waiting list applications are up almost 250%. And that's a crazy number. You've got new regulations and rules being set forth every week by the governor and the mayor, and everybody is trying to do the best they can without any real leadership and without any real clear understanding of what this can look like and what absolutely needs to be done in a consistently uniform way. Yeah. So while businesses are pivoting, and that's sort of the word of the moment, and shifting their models, I don't know that we're doing anything different there, because I don't know that we ever would have known that we were sort of built for this, right? Food rescue at best is random. It has to be responsive. It has to be adaptable. It has to be flexible. And so that's what we are. I think what it's brought to the forefront is an opportunity for us to mirror our values as an organization from the inside out. So we're having these conversations company-wide about not just the physicality of the work, but the emotional burden of this work, and especially the emotional burden of this work in a crisis and in a pandemic. So we've instituted mental health days. We've instituted things like a food pantry in our office just to be able to help reduce exposure, because our front line is already so exposed. And so there are ways that we are seeing that the way that we built Lovin Spoonfuls allows us to respond to a moment in a way that makes sense for us. And I think that's been important for us as individuals, for us as a team, and to be able to continue carrying out consistent service to our partners.
You're talking about earlier when you were describing the company, you're talking about the amount of food waste. Are we getting better, or are we getting worse overall as a country? I'm going to say the country versus globally, but I could say globally as well. Are we getting better, or are we getting worse in regards of food waste? Because this new generation is definitely more conscious of everything. They're like, I mean, I'm hearing from parents, from grandparents, well, not from grandparents per se, like from parents, like, I'm more apt to not use this, or this because my child is calling me out. And so are we doing better, or are we just still we're in our own way? So
I think both, right? I think anything that requires such a massive shift in approach and shift in behavior takes a long time. Look at recycling, 30, 40 years ago, started as grassroots effort, really people pleading with one another, do this for the health of the environment, for the planet, in 30, 40 years. And here we are. And there's been some progress, but boy, do we have a long way to go. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, we still talk about the amount of waste being, for all intents and purposes, the same on an overall level. Over 40% of the food that we produce in this country winds up in a landfill. It's over a third of our global food supply. That said, there are tremendous efforts happening at every level that are helping and that are supporting an effort. I think we saw from the EPA a federal goal to reduce food losses. I don't know that we would have expected to see that I mean, I hope that the EPA makes it, but I think when you start being able to recognize these issues at a level that people start to think about, and that becomes somewhat commonplace, that's real progress. In terms of what we're doing, we fit into a very specific place in this journey, right? In this food waste space. You have food that can't be upcycled and that you would never want to feed to another human being and shouldn't. And so we talk about composting, we talk about animal feed, we talk about anaerobic digestion. They're further down on the preferred methods of diversion, but I do think that there's a greater understanding of what we have to do, that the gap is so large that this is a very simple, in theory, way to close it. So I do think we're getting better. It starts with education. I always think things can move a little faster, but people are people.
This is people. All right. So I have two more questions left. People are at home. They're looking to start a new business. You talked about the evolution of like where you came from and what you've learned. Literally, what would you say to someone that is looking to start a business right now? You did this 10 years ago during a downward economy. You've watched the progression of the company. You're in it again right now where like, okay, what would you say to someone that's looking to start something right now?
So to be clear, I didn't set out to start a business. I was sort of in between careers and wasn't sure what I was going to do. This was something that was speaking to me personally, and I was in a position to sort of take a breath and try and understand sort of what my next move would be. And it revealed itself as a problem that needed to be solved. So the first thing I would say, and whenever anybody asks for a talk on entrepreneurship or starting a business, and my first question is always, why? Why do you want to start a business? What problem are you trying to solve? If the answer is, I want to be an entrepreneur, I don't think that means anything. I think it means that you don't want to work for someone else, and that's fine. But being an entrepreneur is not the same as starting a business. Mm-hmm. Because when you talk about the value of that business and what you are putting into the community, especially right now in the world, we're living in a time with a higher population that's soaring, less resources, a greater divide between the haves and the have-nots. I think it is incumbent on all of us that we have to be responsible for the businesses that we start. And regardless of whether or not you want to make jeans or you want to do something like Lovin Spoonfuls, the way you do it and how you operate business has to be at the forefront. So even if you're making high-end denim, do it the right way. Be a good employer. So those are the questions that I would put back to somebody who's saying, I want to start a business. Well, what kind of employer do you want to be?
If you had an ask, a personal ask and a professional ask of anyone that is listening right now, for Ashley, for Lovin Spoonful, what would be that ask? A professional one and a personal one.
Only one?
No. Wow. You have the floor.
Okay. Let's see. My personal ask, or just an ask in general, wear a mask. Believe in science. Adopt it. I don't know what else to say. And the second piece professionally would also be the same. But I think we think about sort of where businesses are right now and what this has done to the economy and different spaces, different verticals. COVID and really to where we started this conversation, the misconception that we rescue from restaurants is really because we're heavily supported by restaurants. In many ways, we're in the same boat. Over 50% of our revenue generation comes from fundraising and events. We don't have that anymore. We shouldn't. I don't think that anybody should be getting together in big groups the way we do our ultimate tailgate. That's not something that we're going to pursue right now. Things that are safe and done the right way, people should be taking out from restaurants. They should be going to restaurants when they can and where possible. And they should be supporting the nonprofits that they believe in, even if they're not going to an event or getting a great time in return. I've already seen many nonprofits, partners of ours, who have had to close. I'm watching restaurants close. The things that make the community what it is, mostly focus around food, regardless of who that end user is. So if you love the restaurant in your neighborhood and you want to know that people in your community are being fed, it's not going to look the same, but we still have to find a way to make it work and support it. But wear a mask.
I literally ordered so many designer fun masks on Etsy that I'm excited to wear my mask. So I have. Ashley, thank you so very much. I know you're busy. I know we were running a little bit late, so I think
that's okay. It's great to see you.
Literally, your answers was so awesome. So awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that you guys are around, and I love that I'm having these moments of just catching up with everybody. Because it's literally last time I saw you was probably 8 or 9 years ago.
My hair was blonde.
That's
great
okay.
COVID hair.
I had less gray hair, which of course I'm letting it grow out, but I had less gray hair when I knew you, so it's all good. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.